What's the difference between a cheap epoxy floor and a high-end epoxy floor? So at Surface Rescue, we install high-end epoxy floors, but there are a lot of contractors out there that install cheaper epoxy floors. The first thing that I want to point out is that if you've had a cheaper epoxy floor done and the guy's done a decent enough job at finishing the floor, it's probably not going to look miles apart from the floor that I'm standing on now, which our team finished yesterday. Having said that, I've seen plenty of shit epoxy flooring finishes, but let's say that he did an okay job and it doesn't look terrible. The real differences between a cheap epoxy floor and a high-end epoxy floor are ones that you can't necessarily see with the naked eye. Let me explain. Whilst the two floors may look kind of similar on day one, a cheap epoxy floor is often going to fail and begin to fade and potentially peel maybe within 6 months if you're really unlucky, whereas a high-end epoxy floor will continue to look good for decades to come. But aside from that, there are 3 things that vary massively between a cheap epoxy floor and a high-end epoxy floor. That is the amount of surface preparation that has been put into the concrete slab in which the epoxy's applied to. It's also the quality of materials, and lastly, how thick those materials are installed. And what I mean by that is that if an epoxy floor is not installed to a certain thickness, it will be too thin and it won't be able to handle day-to-day use. So a cheaper epoxy floor is typically going to run you between $2,000 to $4,000 for a double garage. Whereas with us, for the same double garage, we're going to be charging between $5,000 to $8,500 depending on the system that our clients select. Now, I understand that that is a massive difference. We don't just charge those prices for shits and giggles, however, there is a reason. The bloke that's doing your floor for $2,000 to $4,000, he can't physically do the same amount of work that we put into our floors because he just hasn't allowed for it in his price. Now, unless he's running the charity, which he's not, you're just getting the cheaper product. You're not getting a deal, you're not getting a bargain, you're just getting a lower quality floor. And why that matters is that most people, when they get an epoxy floor, they're gonna get it for their garage or their carport, an area where they're gonna be driving their vehicles on. So it needs to be strong. It's not like some paint on the wall, which you can kind of afford to half-ass it and cut a few steps in preparation and whatnot, because the paint on your wall never gets tested. But an epoxy floor on your garage or your carport, it's going to get tested every day with the weight of your cars, the UV, and hot tires. So if the floor is not up to standard, it's just not going to work. We speak to dozens of Adelaide homeowners every day, ranging from people that have never had an epoxy floor done to other people that have had an epoxy floor done but they're not happy with it. And with the people that aren't happy with their epoxy floor, there's normally a few things in common. The first one is that they've always engaged a cheaper contractor to do the floor, and either they're not happy with the finish that they've been presented, or perhaps there is a failure that's happened down the line and they've either called them up to get it fixed and either that contractor is no longer in business or doesn't return their call, or if he does, he normally comes up with some bogus bullshit reason for why he can't help them. So the nuts and bolts of it are this. The differences between a cheaper epoxy floor and a high-end epoxy floor come down to the quality of the floor that gets delivered. So that comes down to the surface preparation, it comes down to the materials that are used, and it also comes down to the application thickness, and then also the workmanship and experience of the crew that do the floor for you. So that's number one. But then number 2 is the after-sale support. So what I mean by that is that if you do have a floor that fails, are you going to have a contractor that's actually going to pick up the phone and come and remedy it? Or are you going to have a contractor that either ghosts you or comes up with 1,000 reasons for why they can't help? That is a big difference between a high-end epoxy flooring contractor and a cheap epoxy flooring contractor. So if you're a house-proud property owner and you're looking for a long-term, high-quality floor for your garage, your patio, or perhaps your carport or veranda, then you need to look at Surface Rescue. If you do your research, you'll find that we are head and shoulders above the rest. We're the highest rated for epoxy flooring and concrete resurfacing on Google and Adelaide by a long shot. And if you check out our social media, comparing us to our competitors, it'll become quickly apparent why we are the option for a homeowner that is looking for the best quality floor. If you're someone that's just looking for something that's cheap and you honestly do not care how long the floor lasts, then do not contact us. But if you're someone that wants the best quality floor, you've got to get in contact with Surface Rescue. Click the link down below, enter in your details, and one of our local team will give you a call to have a chat about the project. If it sounds like we can help and we're a good fit, then we can come out to your property for a free on-site consult. It typically takes between 30 to 60 minutes, where we'll inspect the slab, then we'll show you samples and finishes, and we'll give you clear upfront pricing on the spot to handle your epoxy floor. We'll see you out there.